Hello, I'm Sally Wiener Grotta, and this is What If, Why Not, How? Where I ask people who have interesting stories and ideas questions that are on my mind. My guest today is Mary Soon Lee. Though I've known Mary's work for some time, we met, I believe it was for the first time this spring when we were on the same virtual panel at Balticon. Balticon is the Baltimore's annual science fiction conference, which is always a wonderful gathering of people. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, so I did this virtual panel. And Mary was there and enchanted me. The panel consisted of fiction authors who juggle multiple points of view, characters' points of view to tell a story. And that's something Mary has done with great finesse in her award-winning epic fantasy novel in verse, The Sign of the Dragon. And a beautifully illustrated edition of The Sign of the Dragon was published earlier this year. Mary has a long list of publications and awards. I'm not going to go through all of them. But in addition to being a Grand Master of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association, she has received, okay, I got to get the list up, an Ann Lab Readers Award, Dwarf Stars Award, Elgin Award, Riesling Award, and Utopia Award. And I love her sense of humor when she says she hides behind a cryptically named website, marysoonlee.com, and a similarly named account at Blue Sky. And by the way, her humor comes through in her writing too. Mary, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Could you please start us out with a reading from Sign of the Dragon so people can get a sense of why I'm so delighted to find this book?
Absolutely. The art was done by Gary McCluskey. This is the cover art. And the first poem, which I'm going to read two poems. And the first poem, which is the first poem in the book, has a illustration by Gary. To go with it. I'll just hold that there for a second. This poem, before it appeared in the book, appeared in a magazine called Starline. So anyhow, it's the opening poem. Interregnum. 16 years old, fourth son, still they sent him to the mountain together with his brothers before their father's body stiffened. The kingdom suspended without a king, 4 princes, 1 crown, a crown he had no use for, a crown of war, alliances, duty. He slept on straw near his horse, displacing the stable boy, waited for his eldest brother to return triumphant, ready for the throne. Then brother after brother vanished into rock and ice and cloud. The steward took his sword, his shield, sent him out at dusk. No torch, no guide, no horse, no servant, no food, no water. Snow deepened under his boots. He waded through drifts, fell once, twice. The wind mocked him. He thought of the warm stable, the bed of straw, his horse, sleep. But sleep meant death, so he stumbled on. The wind called his brothers' names. He shouted back his own name. The wind laughed. Snow fell. He walked half blind. Sleet kissed his forehead. The wind said, sleep. He sang to drown it. Sang hymns, nursery songs, drinking songs, dirges, ballads, marching tunes, the love songs his mother had favoured. She who was bartered for peace to a man she'd never met. He fell, pushed himself upright, saw a black cloud speed against the wind. She landed beside him, her breath ash, snow steaming from her wings. He knelt, but did not beg, and asked after his brothers. One slept, one fought, one pissed himself. They didn't taste like kings. She laughed. And you, what will you pay for a crown, little princeling? Nothing. I don't want it. She flamed, and he saw himself reflected in her scales, a kneeling, shivering boy. Then why, she asked, are you here? Because they sent me. He stopped. No, he was so tired he couldn't think. Because the kingdom needs a king. He struggled to his feet. And what will you pay for the crown, little princeling? Gold, men, a song? My freedom, he shouted at her. Well, she said, that's a start. Years later, on a spring morning, his queen asked, greatly daring, about the woman whose name he cried in his sleep. Not a woman, he said, his heart on the mountain where he entered his kingship. So that's the end of the first poem in the book. And then a lot of things happen. There are, there are wars, there are disasters of various kinds. And this poem is about 100 pages in, and there is an illustration. So let's have the illustration. Not every poem is illustrated, in fact. Of these, there are, I think, 40 illustrations in the course of the book. But this poem first appeared in Songs of Eret's Poetry Review. Mitcha. Beneath the silver river of stars, under the spreading maple trees, the mare pacing, grazing, pacing, two men watching, no words. On the horse-cropped grass, Mitcha lies down, whinnying. Kayat, once a stable boy, watches beside his king. Under the wind-stirred leaves, Mitcha strains, rests, strains. King Zhao looks a question at Kayat, who nods back his reassurance. Under the crescent moon, emerging, wrapped in membrane, one small foot, then another, two men watching. Dawn floods the river of stars, the foal born, the mare resting. Kayat beside his king, his heart full, a night worth a month of days. That's the end of the second poem. I didn't want to read something grim or something that had massive spoilers for the plot. So it's like a moment between adventures.
It's a lovely moment, beautifully captured. Sign of the Dragon is, well, it's been lauded. I can't add to all the wonderful things everybody's been saying about it, has said from the beginning. It's a novel-length epic fantasy with rich world building, fully realized characters, beautifully written story from numerous points of view. And that would have been enough for most novelists. You chose to write it as a rather thick, full-length collection of poetry, interwoven poetry. I'm curious, why did you make that choice, or was it foisted on you just by the muse? How did this is a remarkable choice to make.
So there's a couple of things. First of all, I did not plan to write anything lengthy. I was a stay-at-home mom with 2 children, and I had been writing individual poems, and most of them were mainstream poems, not fantasy or science fiction. And one summer, in the summer of 2013, I wrote several fantasy poems, and they were just individual poems, and I realized, oh, I'm having more fun with this because I had years back written fantasy and science fiction. And one of the poems I wrote was this opening poem about the boy on the mountain and his father, the king, is dead, and the dragon chooses him as the new king. And it was meant to be just one poem. So that was the intention. But a little bit later, I returned and I wrote another poem about the boy who became the king. And I kept on adding and adding to it. And I suppose I must have been half a dozen poems in before I realized I was going to write a lot of these poems, and the end over 300. It wasn't exactly foisted upon me, but it was much easier for me, because I guess I'm maybe too obsessive about what I'm writing. It was much easier for me to break it up into poems, because if I came to the end of one poem and picked my children up from school, I was still thinking about the overall story, but not in a frantic sort of way that I would have been if I was in the middle of a chapter or just the little episode was finished. So I was able to set it down a bit.
Now, how many poems are in the book?
It's 300 and something. I think it's about 340.
Remarkable. So you did not plan this book. It sort of came to you as the poems evolved on you. At what point did you realize you were writing a novel?
I don't know, but I do. It was written out of order. So a few of the things that happen, like a substantial way into the book, like 1/3 of the way into the book, were written very early on. So I knew the kind of arc that was being told. And well before I reached the end, I knew the complete arc, just not all the little incidents along the way. But it wasn't written, as I say, it wasn't written in order. So even when I reached the end, I went back and added bits in. But before I reached the end, I was going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards through it. Yeah.
Well, that's very in vogue right now, nonlinear writing.
I tell you, it's so much easier, though. I'm convinced it's much easier this way than if you were writing a regular prose thing where you would want a continuity of style through the whole thing.
Yes, you do change your style of poetry throughout, and we have so many different voices. But I found that juxtaposition of different rhythms and different tonalities, it seemed to make the world building more vivid for me, because here's this part of the community, the ordinary people, here's the stable boy, here's the minister of war, it's like here's the palace intrigue and the princess. It's like I just felt like you were giving us snapshots.
Yes, that's what it felt like. Yeah.
And forcing us to build the world inside our minds with you.
Yes.
Which I enjoy doing that.
I'm glad you did. Because the alternative is to just throw the book across the room.
Yes. Well, I've been wanting to do that with some of my work sometimes. The illustrations, Gary McCluskey, the illustrator, they're lovely. How did it feel to see your poems brought to life by him?
Well, it felt great, and B, he had illustrated, I think it was 2 of these poems when they originally appeared in a magazine called Heroic Fantasy Quarterly. And then when I decided that we would have an illustrated edition, I asked him, would he illustrate the whole thing? But it wasn't completely out of the blue, because I had seen him illustrate a couple of them.
Right. Did you have any input, or did you just say, here, Gary, I want you to do this, and he picked the moments? Or...
No, there was a lot of input. I mean, I sent him the whole book, but then I would send him normally 3 poems at a time, and they weren't in sequence. So he, like writing the book, he illustrated it out of sequence. And I typically said either which scene or which characters I wanted to be illustrated, because over the course of the book, I wanted a lot of the main characters to be in at least one of the illustrations. So that was definitely one of the factors.
Right.
Finding a set of poems that encompassed the various major characters. Yeah.
Right. Did you find that to be a different kind of challenge than what you're used to in your writing?
Yes, but it was fun. I mean, it was a good different challenge.
Right.
Yes. I really enjoyed seeing them come to life. Yeah.
Right. As I read Sign of the Dragon, I couldn't help but think of what appears to be an almost universal fascination with dragons in cultures all over the world, including, as I understand, your personal Chinese and Celtic heritage. And then I was also reminded of course, the tradition of the bard storyteller, of things like the Iliad and the Gilgamesh. And so I'm now wondering about your own personal literary or cultural influences that inspire you, or certain books that have inspired you. Could you share that with us?
Well, I read hugely as a child, and since it's my main recreation. So it's very hard to pin down specific things. I do know that some of the dragons that I met early on were in Tolkien and in Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea, both of which I think are fabulous. And I read, the Iliad and the Odyssey in translation. But this is the one of the few things I can point to. I mean, of course, they're in translation and they're classics, and there are other classics, that have, epics like Gilgamesh or something, but they weren't in English. And when I was, so maybe I'm not sure now whether I was a teenager or maybe as old as 20, I read a book called Aurora Leigh by Elizabeth Barrett Browning.
Yes.
I had never before read a novel-length narrative told in poetry, written in English as the first language, not a translation, just here is this novel in verse by an English poet. I mean, a dead poet, I should say. She had been dead for a while. In her day, it was a very successful book, but it's less read now. Anyhow, I really enjoyed it. And some parts of it I just loved. And it just sowed a seed. Until that point, it hadn't occurred to me that one could still be writing, in verse at that length in English. So I think that was a seminal influence, although I didn't realize it at the time. It just sort of lay there in the background as a possibility.
The way I describe it is it's the things that end up in my creative chaos. I don't know where they came from all the time, but they're there percolating and interacting with each other, and suddenly something synthesizes out of it that I certainly didn't create. It's this thingy in here that did that. Two of your other books are collections of themed poetry celebrating science.
Yes.
Elemental Haiku, in which you honor the elements of the periodical, and then How to Navigate Our Universe, a celebration of astronomy. And I kept on looking at that word celebration, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that writing poetry is generally a celebration to you. It's a source of joy rather than the angst of the Romantic era's vision of a poet being ripped apart soul by soul. And not that all writing isn't difficult, but that you do it with joy. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that is mostly a fair assessment. And I know that writing The Sign of the Dragon was particularly fun, even though, as you say, it was challenging. And I've recently been looking back over the course of writing the book, because each day I'm posting a very brief note about a particular poem, one a day. And I look back And I realized many of them went through revision after revision, but I was enjoying it, so it was fine. And I've always loved astronomy. I mean, not that I've never actually studied astronomy. I did do something related. I did an MSc in astronautics and space engineering, but
Ooh.
that was about, building a rocket or a satellite or the orbits. It wasn't about the stars and the planets and the galaxies and things like that. So, as I say, I've never actually studied it, and I had to, look up stuff.
That's why we have libraries.
Yeah, yes, but I did enjoy it. And the periodic table elemental haiku one was written much more like the sign of the dragon. I wrote a haiku for hydrogen, and then I thought, I could write one for the next element in the periodic table. And then after I'd got that far, I thought, well, I could try and go through the whole periodic table. And it's really a tribute to my high school chemistry teacher that this seemed like a fun idea to me, because I think many people didn't have a nice chemistry experience at high school, but I had a lovely one. So for me, it was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks to her. Her name was Jane Anglis. It still is Jane Anglis if she ever happens across this.
We all have those teachers that I wish there's one teacher I wish I had told how much she had meant to me before she passed, because to some extent, she's the reason I'm a writer.
Oh, that's great.
And I really wish we called our teachers by their first name. She was Teacher Margaret Sheets. If anybody here had her, she was a dragon of a teacher. She could intimidate the most confident students, but she also was nurturing. If she saw something that she wanted to encourage, she did it, and she would put her whole soul into it, and she did for me, which was amazing. So your teacher Jane, my teacher Margaret, they don't know. But I hope they understand what great things they did for so many of us. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but I think teachers are just so amazing.
It's a good time.
Now, you've also written prose fiction. You have a couple of collections of short stories and such. I'm curious for you, other than the physical structure and the certain rules of what poetry is, how is writing a novel composed of verse different from writing prose for you as you're going through the process?
It feels, I guess, as though I get a break at the end of each poem when it's okay to wander away. To me, I mean, I understand that maybe there are people who are more disciplined, but to me, if I'm writing a single piece of prose, the whole time I'm writing it, I'm in it, and there isn't really a break. So, right. I mean, you could structure a prose piece. I mean, I have seen, I guess, for instance, there are a number of romances nowadays where the point of view alternates between the two sides of the romance. Were I to find myself writing one of those books, I guess I could take a breath each time I changed between the two sides of the romance, but the chunks are probably larger, so I'd still be going for a while.
Yeah. So it's simply the fitting it into your life that makes it different. Do you approach them with the same mindset, or is there a different mindset for you?
Unless I'm trying to write a form poem, either a rhyme poem or a haiku or anything that follows a rule, I think I approach them in much the same way. I do spend more time in the process immediately revising the words when I'm writing poetry. With prose, I'm more likely to say, well, that's close to the way I want to say it, because close is often actually close enough somehow for prose. It doesn't need much additional work. But the poem, I feel like I can't progress to the next few lines if I know that the first few lines aren't very close to the way that I want them to be. I mean, not that I don't sometimes go back and this endless revision cycle, but somehow, yes, it's more.
Well, poetry is also can be much more spare.
Yes.
Then you leave it more to the pauses.
Yes. Today, the poem that I was writing about, I looked back at my notes and I realized nearly all the revisions consisted of just condensing it. I was saying almost exactly the same thing, but just in fewer and fewer words as I revised it.
Now, I have a question about the business end of things. Am I correct? Your publisher's Jabberwocky?
Well, for this book, yes, they are a literary agency and they mostly don't publish books, except for they will do ebook versions of their authors' print books for various reasons. If there isn't an ebook version, or if the books have gone out of print, but the author is still having new print books published and so on. So there are various reasons. And the agent that I have used to head their ebook department as well as do print sales. And I don't know if she still heads their ebook department. So I don't want to say that because maybe she doesn't. But that was how, we first, during the pandemic, we decided we were going to put out an ebook version because in my panic-stricken way, I thought, I'm going to die and this book will never.
Aww.
I guess it was more like I thought, what if I die and this book has never been published? So we put out an ebook version.
Okay.
But the haiku was published by 10 Speed Press, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House.
Right.
So that's like a conventional publisher.
Right. Is the print edition of Sign of the Dragon also at Jabberwocky?
Yes.
So that's unusual for them.
Yes, that is unusual for them.
Yeah. It's a new world where an agent will publish a book.
Yeah, I know.
That's why I was curious about that. May I ask, what are you working on now?
Mostly, if you look over the course of the year, mostly individual poems that are intended not to be part of anything larger. I did write one group of 7 poems, but it's not very lengthy, but they are a set. And right now, I've begun another set of poems. They are not telling a single narrative, though. They just have a theme, and the theme is dragons. And I've written other dragon poems, but they do have a stronger thematic connection to each other than just being dragon poems without being specific. And at the moment, we're thinking that we will maybe self-publish a small book, or maybe through the agent, or the agent might sell it. I don't know, because we're not sure how long it will be and whether I'll include other dragon poems that I've already published. But the thing would be, my daughter would illustrate some of it. And it would be very nice. I mean, that's just a different thing. That's something that would be a pleasure for me. She did the cover for the astronomy book, but that other than that, she hasn't done art for me.
Well, that astronomy book, the cover's beautiful.
Thank you.
Just beautiful. It's not one would think of as the writer's daughter creating it, but obviously talent runs in the family.
But she's very artistic. I mean, she spent about 3 months studying art at university before she decided to switch to liberal arts. But she still does art. It's just she decided that she would rather, study more things. So.
Sure. Do you have any suggestions for other poets and or prose writers, particularly ones who are either just starting out or struggling as they move forward?
I don't. It's very hard for me to know if they're starting out and struggling. But and this is not really the same. Okay, I mean, it's not the same. Okay, it's science fiction. But I read this recently, and it's the next book I'm using in a poetry book club. It's called Seed Beetle. I don't know if I'm going to say the author's name correctly, but her name is Mahala Smith. And the reason that I mention it is because it also tells a story through its poems. It has a narrative. It's actually got a conceit that it's a collection of poems that I think it's the daughter in this conceit has assembled from the works of a more famous poet, but it's set in the future. This is a poet who doesn't actually really exist in a future that doesn't exist, and then there are the fictional poems that the poet wrote about their mother's life and so on. It's a little hard to explain, but it is a narrative told in poems. And I actually, what happened was I raced through it, and then I realized I haven't really thought about this as poetry. I was just going on to see what so before I have the poetry book club, I have to reread it and try and slow down a little. But I mean, I've read so many things that I love recently, but I fear that many of them are not struggling writers at all. They're more like quite successful writers.
I was just thinking about if you have any suggestions for the writers, for poets, about writing poetry or even prose writers. But
I have some books that I've liked that were about writing, the craft of writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
There's one by Ted Kuza, and it's called something like Poetry Handbook. I could look it up, but it's by Ted, Kooser. And he is a successful academic literary poet, but his book is great. It's short, and to me it's my favorite. I've read quite a lot of craft books, but it's my favorite one for poetry, if anybody is looking for one. And then in a very different vein, and it's here because I use it a lot. So a lot of people write from prompts and so on, and just for me, it happens that I found this a very fruitful book. It's called The Daily Poet, and it has a prompt for each day. Like you can look at June the something, and it will have a prompt, and you can follow it or not follow it. And I often don't follow them, but they often just give me some idea. Because what I often find is I have an idea for a poem, and the point when I actually write it is when I get a second idea, and it's the juxtaposition of the two that coalesces the whole thing. So this is the second piece. Like I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'll write a dragon poem. And then they say something like, write a poem about a map. And then I'm like, a dragon and a map? How is that? What is that? So for me, it just, I'm sure there are many, many similar things. But for me, this one, the authors are Kelly Russell Agadan and Martha Solano. I may have said that incorrectly too. I don't know how they pronounce their names, but that one has worked well for me.
Great. Thank you very much. My guest today was Mary Soon Lee, the multi-award-winning author of The Sign of the Dragon. Her other books include Elemental Haiku, How to Navigate Our Universe, both science-based poetry collections. And also she has a couple of short story collections, Ebb Tides and Other Tales, and Winter Shadows and Other Tales. You can connect with Mary Soon Lee on her website, marysoonlee.com, and on Blue Sky. As for me, my two newest books are Of Being Woman, a collection of feminist science fiction from NobleFusion Press, and Daughters of Eve from Bayit Publishing, which is an essay-based workbook and journaling guide for exploring the nature of our lives today through the lens of the stories of the women of the Hebrew Bible. My website and blog are sallywienergrotta.com. Up there, where you can sign up for my very occasional newsletter. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, sometimes on Blue Sky, and someday on Substack. I keep on meaning to do that. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mary Soon Lee. This was just a delight, as I knew it would be.
Thank you so much, Sally. I really appreciate it.